Díchuh agus filteróiristeach. Is mé sé drolín an bhfuil tú go má. Are you well? I'm well. Thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a little bit longer of an episode. We're going to be talking about La Bealtaine. I'm going to get a pipe together, as per normal. Wouldn't be a video with me in it without a pipe. So, we're going to talk about La Bealtaine. Now, I guess you would say that pronouncing it that way is definitely more of a Munster dialect, Bealtaine. I have family and friends out in Connacht, mainly in Galway and Mayo, and they don't say it Bealtaine. They say it Bealtaine. So there is dialect difference. Don't ask me how they say it up in Ulster, because those people up in Donegal, they are some strange folks. Their dialect is amazing, but it's very Scottish in sound to me. Okay, pipe gathered. Hair back. Tea ready. Notes ready. So you guys are tuning in because you want to know all about Bealtaine from the cultural type of standpoint. So, let's get this pipe together. Smoking some Mad Merlin, as it's called. Might take a bit to light. It's a broken flake tobacco. So I have notes. And the reason I have notes is because if I don't have notes for myself on a topic like this, I'll go down side paths and I won't stay organized. And instead of getting from point A to point B directly, I will spiral up the mountain and it'll take a long time to get there. Now that's how you drink a chai tea. Fantastic. All right, Bealtaine. So, what's in the name? If you see me glancing down, I'm referencing notes, just like I did in my Samhain video. Well, names define things. They give us concepts and themes and descriptions, and they can convey emotions and feelings. So, Bealtaine. We will come back to the etymology of Bealtaine in a moment. So as you know, it happens in May. If you watch my video on festival dates debated, you'll understand that for us it's more likely around May 12th than our May 1st, or when the hawthorn blooms, or when it's time to bring the cattle back to summer pasture, which is, you know, in Ireland or in Scotland, to the higher elevations. We know that the year was divided into two halves, a light half of the year and the dark half of the year, with Samhain being the beginning of the dark half of the year. Bealtaine is the beginning of the light half of the year. Now you're going to have to excuse some of my pronunciations. I don't speak Old Irish. I don't know many people that do. I definitely don't speak Old Celtic. So I'll do my best to get through some of these pronunciations. In Old Celtic, we have Bealtaine. Bealtaine. These are fires, bonfires, generally associated with the god Belos, probably Belanos, the bright. In Old Irish, we have um, Ketsawan. Ketsawan. And that's from the Old Celtic too, which is Kentu Samenos, first of summer. In Cormac's glossary, we have a term Ketsav Shin, first of the summer weather. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that term in Cormac's glossary, Ketsavshin, is where Scottish Gaelic gets their word for the month of May, of which I can't pronounce. Now, you heard me say the word La Bealtaine. La Bealtaine is in reference of the actual festival, not the month of May. If we look at the Gallic or the Gaulish Coigli calendar, Bealtaine is not mentioned, but if we look at where Samhain is on that calendar, the bipolar opposite of Samhain would be what we know as Bealtaine. And this is where the division in light half of the year versus dark half of the year is first recorded. I would say something like Samhain, end of summer, is Simonius, and May would be Giamonia, end of winter. So, what is Bealtaine? Well, most of the Gaelic holidays are associated with a goddess. We have with each, with Imbolc we have, Brija or Briat. You could associate Bealtaine with a goddess, Eru. It's interesting to note that when you look at the lore, the mythology, it's pretty much all of the invasions almost. I think all but one. That, you have Partholon, the Tuatha De Danann, and the Sons of Meal all invade, all come to Ireland on Bealtaine. Bealtaine is definitely the first of summer, the beginning, newness. Of light, of the beginning of the light half of the year. It was a time of a reunion of the people. And this festival was held at a sacred center. Now we know that Samhain is associated with the Hill of Tara, with the king, the high king, the Ard Rí, whereas Bealtaine is associated with another sacred center. There's two sacred centers of Ireland. You could say two kidneys of the same beast. And, well, the Hill of Tara is associated with the High King. At Samhain, at Bealtaine, the place shifts to another place, and this place is called the Hill of Uisneach. And it's associated not with the High King, it's associated with the Drui. The Drui, the Druids, if you want to anglicize it, the Druids are associated with the Hill of Uisneach. Now the hearth there was round, whereas the hearth at Tara was square. You could suggest that, the festival at Samhain, at the Hill of Tara, the fish, the feast, the celebration, was more of like could be suggested as like a marriage of the king, high king, to the land. There's been some mention that the sacred fire that was at Tara as well as Ushnik was done by 9 men gathering 9 woods, 9 sacred woods. What those are, well, that's another video. But it has been suggested that the use of a fire drill, probably most likely you would know from bushcraft as like, your hearthboard and a bow drill set. No, there was some rivalry, but it was a competitive it was a welcome competitive rivalry between, the druid class versus, the nobility, the high king and his warriors and such. It was a welcomed rivalry, I guess you would say. Each needing the other. No, I think the most common theme that people might know about is where there's 2 bale fires. There's 2 large fires where people drove the cattle between the fires. The fires being so close and so hot together that it could just singe the hair sometimes on the cattle. And there's a saying, between 2 bale fires, which is where we get the term stuck between a rock and a hard place. Now, the Eastern fire is associated with the gods, where the Western fire was associated with the sacrificer of the wife and the consorts of the gods. Now, in the wintertime, meat was called, winter food was, meat. And in the summer food, it was called white meat, which is the dairy produce. So, things like cream, butter, cheese, and milk. That type of stuff was, summer food. It was white meat. Now, during this time of year, there was a definite shortage of fodder. By late winter and early spring, so by May, it was definitely time to move the herds. And when the herds moved, there was a division of labor, and there was a division in the community, a division of the tribe, a division of the people. Women and children were the ones that stayed with the animals, for the most part. Like the largest percentage of women and children tended the herds. Some men stayed to protect and weed and stayed back. But most men, during this time of year, Bealtaine, was the time that men began cattle raiding. They began military service. This is when wars and raids began. Also, we have to look at like the agricultural point of view with flax, because that was women's work. It was planted in late April, and it was not pulled to mid-August, which is, we have mention of Bealtaine. We have August, Lunasa. And that's when women returned from, the summer pasture to help with the harvesting of wheat, and help with the other harvest, because by then the ewe's milk and the cow's milk was on the severe decline. I mean, some women did stay. They did gardening and milking and cooking and spinning, and they attended to the men that were working men that stayed on the farms, the elderly men, and the sick. So why did people celebrate Bealtaine? Well, it could be argued that out of daily life, perhaps the traditions that grew into a set of customs that formed into a common cultural system of belief. It's hard to say. But May definitely began that more of a pastoral, the agricultural cycle of the year. And with cattle being extremely important to these people, it was their wealth, it was their social status, and there was laws. I mean, if you study Brehon law, there are laws upon laws upon laws, and lots of them deal with cattle. I mean, everything had an honor price, everything had a value, but cattle were worth, like, that was your money. It was definitely a time of the year for fertility. It's when war began. And they were a warrior culture. Mm-hmm. So, we talked a little bit about where it was celebrated. The sacred center, being Ushnik during this time of year, is definitely considered to be the navel of the island, the navel of the center. And there's a lot of cross-cultural references with this, with India, with Rome. But the stone there, the stone of divisions, as it's called, the pillar stone, has 5 ridges. And there's no ramparts at Ushnik, which is different than Tara. Now, there's a myth that goes way, way back that deals with sacrifice and human sacrifice, and then druids' tongues being cut out and buried underneath the hill of Ushnik. If that's something of interest, you'll have to look into that on your own. But Ushnik is a sacred center during this time of year of Bealtaine. And it's associated with the Dree. Let's take a look at the customs. You guys probably want to know more about customs. Oh, that's fantastic. I haven't had chai in so long. So what customs do we have? Well, sex. We talked about fertility. Sex is important. It's the continuation of the people. We'll get to that. But things like climbing a local sacred hill to watch the sunrise, washing, bathing, and even collecting in the morning dew was extremely important. These are still things that, Reconstructionists do. These are still things that Gaelic polytheists do. Drinking from the well, a local sacred well at dawn, the first of the water, the first of the milk. Gathering leaves, flowers, wearing them, turning them into things that you would wear. All the greenery. There was an importance placed upon protection. Now, if we look at the wheel of the year, and we have Samhain, we have the opposite being Bealtaine. The veil still thins at Bealtaine. It's still in a very in-between time. It's an otherworldly time. There can still be mischief. There's a worry about protection because witches can steal your milk. And the fairy folk need to be addressed as well. The good neighbors. Lots of stuff that deals with purification and blessings. When we drive the cattle through the two balefires, we do so as it's a purification. Now, you'll find a lot of stuff mentioned with Bealtaine, with cattle. Just like at Lunasa, you're going to find a lot of stuff that deals with water and horses. Now, this was a time of year when children were being weaned from their mothers. So, infant mortality rate was the second highest it is versus when it's being born, or, this is the time when they're being weaned. So, being weaned, they're off their mom, and they're separated from their mother's milk. And they're having, porridge, they're having gruel, and they're having dairy added to that. So it's also a time when there's, fear. And when there's fear, there's a lot of stuff about protection, blessings, and purification. So we have the two fires, cattle, but there's something to mention about, there's the healing power of light, the sunlight. The sun is fire, and you have, the healing power of the sun, the heat and the light and the warmth of the sun, fire, trapped in the dew. So fire inside of water. So that's gathered. It's used for, healing, and it's bathed in to wash yourself. You go sometimes to the local holy well, and you drink the very first at dawn from the holy well, or your first dairy of the day, the first of on this day, which this day, meaning like Bealtaine, according to our calendar, is not actually the first. It's closely related to, the 12th, if you're going by the calendar dates. But the sun in the water, being reflected into the water, being trapped in the water, is the gentle sun. It's a life-strengthening sun. Whereas the sun closer to the harvest is a hot, scorching sun. And that's a different sun. It's a completely different sun, especially ritually, it's a different sun. Now there's mention of cow hairs knotted together with red string and formed into a rope, and with as many knots in that rope as the number of cattle in the herd. And people would sing or chant something, either in Irish or in Scottish, that translates to something like, the milk of the one below, the milk of the one above, into my own big pail. And as this rope was dragged throughout the morning dew to bless it, that's what they chanted. Hawthorn branches were cut, they were collected, they were worn, but a lot of men would cut hawthorn branches in full bloom, and they would sneak them into women's rooms. I'm talking single people here, young people, teenagers, young adults, and they would, through the covert darkness, sneak into the women's rooms or the girls' rooms and leave these flowers, these hawthorn branches, to symbolize, to signify, I'm courting you. And it was possibly meant even in earlier times that it was like, this is, like, I give these to you, and we have, adult relations, we exchange sexual favors. And this is what would be translated to as planting the May. The May bush, we don't have in Gaelic culture, in Celtic culture, the maypole. That's an English thing that comes from probably the Norse. Well, maybe even not the Norse, but it's definitely you know, it's a later thing, and it's definitely not Celtic. But we had a May bush that was decorated with ribbons, brightly colored ribbons, eggshells. Marsh marigolds were collected, and they're called Lush Bui Bealtaine. That's what they're called. And those flowers were gathered, and then they were scattered around the home on the floors for luck and prosperity for the remainder light half of the year. But I think the herb, the tree, it's definitely a tree. But thing that's most mentioned throughout the lore and throughout history is the rowan during this time of year. The rowan tree is used for protection. Rowan wood was sometimes created into talismans with red ribbon, hung at the door, hung at windows. Sometimes an equal cross was made and wrapped with ribbon, placed at the door, much like we use salt at the door and the windows, as well as iron. So iron is a big one as well, but during this time of the year, rowan was gathered. Now, I don't know if many of you have seen the original film, The Wicker Man, not the Nicolas Cage rubbish, but the original. If you remember that movie, when they were celebrating their festival and they had the parade, their procession, where there's a hobby horse, you know, the man dresses as a woman, there's a fool for a day. That type of parade comes from the types of parades that were originally done on Bealtaine. And there's a lot to that. It's to go into that would probably be another 10-15 minutes, and I won't do that to you. These parades still exist in Cornwall. They still exist in Wales, but they're done today at summer solstice. Sometimes it's called midsummer. But at summer solstice time is when you see a lot of these types of parades. And a lot of the Bealtaine Festival customs have moved on to the customs of summer solstice, such as like leaping the bonfire, things like that. So that's pretty much all I got for you guys this evening. A lot could be said about Bealtaine. So many people today are celebrating, so many pagans are celebrating Beltane. So many Wiccans are celebrating Beltane. And I ask myself, what are they really celebrating? I look at their ritual. I look at their words. I look at their customs. I look at the foods that they're eating. I look at the language that they use. And I say, what is this that you're doing? This is not Bealtaine. What gods are you honoring during this time of year? There's so much that could be said just looking back at the things I just shared. What are you doing that's related to Bealtaine? If you're just getting together and you're having a fire, that's not Bealtaine. Now, I'm not saying you can't be, I don't want to use the word simple, I'll say direct. I'm not saying you can't be more direct with your practices. Can you get together and have a fire? But of course you can. But you have to do it with the right intent. You know, what other Celtic customs are you attaching especially Gaelic customs. What are you taking from the culture to put into this festival? So, yeah, now that you're watching this, and for you guys, you're calling it Bealtaine, which I should add a small little interjection here. The word Bealtaine is an English word that goes back to a much older time in the English language, which was taken from Scots, not Scottish Gaelic, Scots. And that is in fact a Norse language. It's classified as a Norse language. The Scots language borrowed from Scottish Gaelic, Gaelic. Don't ask me how to pronounce La Bealtaine and Scottish Gaelic, because they don't know how. So when people say they're celebrating Bealtaine, I'm not at all surprised that what they're celebrating has nothing to do with Gaelic culture. With its culture, with its beliefs, with its cosmology, with its ritual structure, with its language, its customs. So, now that you know a little bit more about Bealtaine, I hope you can take some little bits and pieces, plug them in, and add them to your work with your people. And on that, I'm going to finish my tea and hit the hay. So, slán go fóill, Iowa, and have a great Bealtaine.